Why does she have a ball jointed torso but Godzilla doesn't? Like, that just seems like a really grave oversight when it comes to the design of these things.
And now we know. Amid all of the awesome news that came out at Toy Fair this weekend, like Pacific Rim being a thing again from McFarlane, an awesome skeleton Goji reaction figure from Super 7, I think Mondo was showing off some of their stuff, but we couldn't really tell, because the only thing that people were focusing on was He-Man. Kyle Wadiga from Super 7 was active on Discord answering a few questions that folks had about the upcoming Toho Ultimates releases. Specifically, he was answering questions regarding torso articulation, as that was one of the major complaints that folks had about the Wave 1 Godzilla figure. And to everyone's surprise, it turns out that Mechagodzilla in Wave 2 and Destoroyah in Wave 3 are intended to have ball-jointed torsos. And this was kind of a shock, because Waves 1 through 3 were all kind of in production, and the feedback from customers that they were really missing that ball-jointed torso on Godzilla wasn't really available to Super 7 as they were designing 2 and 3. By the time Wave 1 was in our hands, Wave 2 and 3 were pretty much set in stone. Well, as it turns out, Kyle's been designing these things to have ball-jointed torsos. But whether or not the final figure that we get in our hands have ball-jointed torsos is up to the factories. As it turns out, they can just unanimously make the decision that these figures get swivels instead of ball-jointed torsos. And as frustrating that is to the consumer, I can't imagine how frustrating that is for the designer. Like, imagine thinking that you're making this really awesome toy, you can't wait to have it in hand, and can't wait to see what people think about it, and the factory just, frankly, fucks it up. When this was shared on Discord, very quickly there were people thinking that this couldn't possibly be true, and this doesn't make sense with... I hit my microphone. This doesn't make sense with how business relationships work. Like, Super 7 is paying these companies are supposed to do what Super 7 tells them to do. And I don't think it's that simple. We all know that big toy manufacturers like Hasbro and Mattel, they manage to get their price points down because they get things made in really vast amounts. Yeah, we can get a $25 Marvel Legend if we're making 1 million of them at a time. On the other end of the scale, these figures get more expensive the fewer of them you make. But that's only been true for the past 15, 20 years or so. Prior to that, if you weren't making a lot of figures, factories just didn't want to deal with you. Why would they make your 4,500 Cat Slayers or your 7,000 Thunder Tanks when I can make millions of the Marvel Legends, the He-Mans, the Lego sets? I don't need to waste my time with you. Factories nowadays are more willing to play ball with smaller toy manufacturers if you play by their rules. If you're familiar with some of Super 7's other Ultimates lines, you would know that this is not a recent occurrence. Wave 1 of Silverhawks had paint over the joints, such that when people got their figures out of the package and were moving and posing them, the paint was chipping off and it gave the impression that, oh my gosh, my figures are falling apart. Whereas in reality, as we heard from Brian, it was more so that the factory wanted to make sure that these figures were completely painted just so that Super 7 wouldn't go back to them to complain about potential issues. Wave 2 of G.I. Joe Ultimates, they had the 3D face scanning technology, or the 3D face painting, whatever it's called. But they did an initial layer, but never went back to actually finish painting the faces, which gave a sense of an incomplete product that people were really not happy about. So then the $1 million question is, why doesn't Super 7 just move factories? Super 7 has been moving factories. Over the course of the pandemic, they moved from one Chinese factory that was doing Thundercats Wave 2, which took, I think, like a year and a half, maybe 2 years to come out, over to factories in Vietnam. And then a bunch of the figures that were coming out of Vietnam, people had issues with. Now stuff is getting made at another factory in China, or at least some of their stuff, because I'm pretty sure it's divided amongst several factories. Anyway, a factory in China where that 3D face painting technology is available. But no matter which of these factories you're going to run into the issue of scale of production when you're dealing with these niche properties. If a factory thinks that a double barbell style torso ball joint is going to be more problematic during production and have more scrap pieces than a swivel, I can see a reality where they just decide to put in the swivel. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm definitely not saying that. And I don't want to make any excuses for how they just completely, apparently, ignore Kyle when he says, hey, this is supposed to be a ball-jointed torso. It just seems that that's the reality of the situation, unfortunately, when you are a smaller company. And it's funny looking back, because I remember when those renders of Ultimates Wave 1 Godzilla first came out, and I knew that Super 7 figures tended to have a swivel over a ball-jointed torso. But there was something about the way that it looked that I thought it was going to be a ball-jointed torso. And even having this mold in hand, like, I don't know if I can get it on camera very well, but it almost looks like it was designed, if like this lower part of the waist was designed to be a socket for a ball joint up here. Like, it does look like that. But I might just be seeing things that I want to be there. Kind of like those guys who are saying that the NECA Burning Godzilla looks better than the Wave 2 Ultimates one. Yeah, this guy, folks are saying wipes the floor with the Ultimates Wave 2 Godzilla. That isn't even in hand yet, by the way. But yeah, you know, the guy with the underbite and the head that pops off and the bendy wire tail that, you know, the bendy wire can break out of the tail and just ruin your figure. Yeah, this is supposed to be the thing that wipes the floor with Super 7's Wave 2 Burning Godzilla. Which is just some real revisionist history, man, because like I like this figure for what it is. It's a $20 Burning Godzilla. It's a repaint of a mold that wasn't great to begin with. But come on, people hated this thing when it came out, right? And more for just the reasons I listed, right? Like, there was screen accuracy was, and continues to be, a main sticking point for the Godzilla community. But to say that this thing is better than Wave 2 Ultimates outright? I don't know, man. I think people are nostalgic for the price point that these guys came out at, right? 20 bucks. 20 bucks you could get this. And again, because it was mass-produced in a factory. NECA stuff was all over the place, and it wasn't catered to just the hardcore collectors buying a made-to-order model like the Ultimates. 2015 was a much better time. If you were in a department store and you vaguely liked Godzilla and you saw a $20 Godzilla figure sitting there, you might think, oh, cool, I'll pick that guy up. I'm not an economist, or I have no business degree whatsoever, but I don't think I need either of those things to say that the economy in 2023 is kind of shit compared to 2015. The price of NECA mass producing their stuff now, you're looking at high 30s, low 40s on their figures, maybe even higher than that. So the $20 price tag that people are so fondly remembering with this guy, that's gone. And it ain't coming back. I'm sorry I went on a tangent there. It's just when I saw people talking about this online, I was just... I know the Godzilla community can be kind of weird sometimes, but this was just something else. Anyway, to wrap it up, it's great to see that Super 7 is trying to design these things to have as much articulation as possible, and it's a goddamn shame that the factories are getting in the way of that. I'm sure they know how much we want to see these improvements, we want to see these articulation schemes, but my hope is that when Wave 2 gets into people's hands and Wave 3 gets into people's hands, and they get a feel for that ball-jointed torso, I'm really hoping that the fanfare really drives the upper management of Super 7 to push their factories to do better. It also looks like Wave 4 has hit the minimum order quantity with the factories. Space Godzilla is going to have a swivel, probably, just because he's got a weird pelvic thing. But Mogera is intended to have a ball joint as well. While recording this, Kyle actually confirmed that Destoroyah will have a ball jointed torso, as he received a pre-production sample. So that is amazing to see. I'm so happy about that. So we know Mechagodzilla and Destroyer will have it. Mogera, hopefully. Space Godzilla, probably not, but that makes sense. And overall, it's just so nice to see these improvements being made as quickly as possible. And I have a lot of hope that if Mogera was able to get funded following the fan reception of Wave 1, then I think the line will prosper for a long time yet to come. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.